I'm back here with Rich Flack, and we've got a stunner of an image from you, man. This is a little bit of an older image, right? Like a couple years back,
Yeah,
Rich? Yeah. And
yeah,
so
it is. Yeah,
I've
and
seen it
thanks for having me
around.
again, Ray.
Yeah, of course, man. I
So,
always love chatting with you. Um, I've seen this image around a few times, but this is really exciting because it's the most time I'm going to get to spend with it. And before we recorded, I really took some time to sit with this image, and I feel like it's similar to the last image we talked about. The things that you just keep discovering about it, the more time you spend with it, are just wonderful. And I love that about this style of photography. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the capture of this photo.
yeah, thanks, Ray. And yeah, as I said, thanks. It's always awesome spending time with you, and yeah, to be on the receiving end.
Yeah.
Yeah, so be kind, man.
Will
um,
do.
but yeah, it's an image that it's the kind of images I love taking, and actually is I guess part of probably be a lifelong project, but trying to capture what I call iconic birds in iconic African landscapes. And so, yeah, the story behind the shot is, yeah, it's multifaceted because I think like these shots for me are about giving equal weight to the landscape, but then equal weight to the bird. And so there's two stories. The one is just the magnificence of this area. It's in the Natal Midlands, but it's also the Carcliff. And it's just, for me, it's just all about these hills and these dam structures and just how the light falls on them. And yeah,
Yeah.
this is about winter and how winter feels in these hills and just, yeah, how I experience them. So there's that part, like how I feel in a landscape. I don't know if the Buff Street chat feels the way I do, but I'm sure he must. I mean, it's just such a beautiful, tranquil like place for me, and so I really wanted to show that off. And then, secondary is I just love birds, and this guy, yeah, is iconic for these kind of hilly areas, rocky terrain, and just yeah, a bird that's full of personality and I guess a bird that I've got to know really well. So I've got to, I think when you spend time with your subjects, you just end up, yeah, just I'm fascinated by these little guys, and I probably spend way too much time with them. And so yeah, just telling, yeah, they're full of character and personality, and so I also just wanted to show that off a little bit about who he is, because this is a male,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think the other thing about this shot is just it took a long time. Some of my shots, funny, like your last shot, I guess the difference here is, yeah, sometimes it happens to me, like it will happen in a day, and somewhat spontaneously with intentionality, like we chatted about
Yeah.
last time. But this one was like good 2.5, 3 months
Wow.
to get. I took a lot of shots of this bird and this background, but I'd always find like the background and not the bird, or the bird and not the background. And yeah, what was quite interesting is that the light would change. So in the mornings they tend to hang out where the light first hits
Hmm.
the hill. So you can imagine like that's constantly changing. So if you leave it
Yeah.
for too long, like you go back and they're not where you hope they would be. So was there one of those, I guess, that's like, persistence beats resistance type photos where you have a vision and you're
Yeah.
just determined to kind of do it justice. And yeah, so that's really just the heart behind the image.
I have a quick question for you. I have a bunch of questions after hearing about it. But the first one that comes up to mind, Rich, is it more rewarding to you when you've had to put in that longer period of effort and everything, just as far as the capture of it? It doesn't necessarily make the photo better in the end as far as the viewer cares, right? Because they don't know unless you tell them the amount of work that goes into it. But for yourself, is it more rewarding when you've had to put in that long time versus like, oh, I got it in a day?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's more, does it portray what I hope to say, So some
Yeah.
images have been very quick in the making, and I must say I find them as fulfilling, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Okay.
And like others have taken a long time, but I think it's just because I love the places and that I shoot in and the birds that I shoot. So I think it's just like a celebration of just where I've been, in the places I love. So
Okay.
yeah, I think actually like equally probably fulfilling, but I mean, there's obviously something rewarding in the like sort of perseverance stakes, is having
Yeah.
the faith to rock up and eventually get your vision. There's definitely like an added like yeah, it'll eventually happen. That's, like anything is probably more fulfilling. But yeah, I think, yeah, I take a lot from, when I think the vision comes together, because it really doesn't happen often.
Sure.
So I have a very small selection of these shots that I would call iconic African birdscapes.
Yeah.
And so I guess, yeah, I think part of it is I just start to see failure as not really failure anymore. It's just perseverance of, achieving the images I love. And yeah, but there's something special, I guess, with just having known how long it took to get
Yeah.
everything to come together.
Well, I know
Yeah.
for myself, I think some of what happens is just like you said, like the failures aren't failures because you're seeing these almosts. You're like, oh, it's almost there. And you said already in the beginning when you talked about this photo, you took a lot of variations, and it took a while to get to this one that you really felt was at the level you were after. And so I sort of love that roller coaster of, oh, it's almost not quite there, almost not quite there, and it's just like, but having the something you talk about a lot, and I love that we bring that up in the show, but having the confidence and the vision to say, I know what I really want here. Like I can see, you can imagine the image already, and then putting yourself in the right place over and over and over again until it actually finally comes to fruition. And maybe it's still not exactly what you had in your, mind's eye, but it's sometimes even better,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that process. I think it's like just sometimes thinking that you might not get to show off, get your
Yeah.
vision to come. So that's also quite like tough because it's there,
Yeah.
it's just trying to get the, things to align. But yeah, there's something, I don't know, like it was funny. I was actually thinking about this image and I didn't really want to show it, to be honest.
Okay.
It took me a while to like put it out there, and it's not many. Like I think in my early days, I used to just about every image I felt like that, and I think yeah, there's just some images that mean more to you
Mm.
as a person, and this was probably one of them because I think it just took a lot of time and it was special to me, and so
Yeah.
I'm always like a little bit apprehensive because when that personal, you kind of got to get a bit detached from them, I guess, before you put them out there because not everyone's going to necessarily be a fan. And you
Sure.
want people to love, you
Yeah.
like just to feel what you felt, So it was one of those images, which still, I mean, it's like, yeah, it's a couple of 3, 4 years ago, I think. So I had I guess, some degree of confidence as a photographer, but I still was hesitant. I was like, I don't really want to show this,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like it for you, but there are some
Totally.
images that are more personal than others.
Yeah. I think something that comes to my mind recently that I've been going through a lot because I've been experimenting with a lot of new techniques and new lenses and stuff like that for me I'm learning. And
Mm.
as an experienced photographer sharing a lot of stuff on social media for me pretty much every day, there's a certain level of confidence I have that I'm going to share a photo and generally get X response, right? And then I
Yeah.
start trying this new stuff, and then I start getting this feedback that's like, oh, what if it did this? What if you did this? What if you did this? And I'm like, you have no idea how hard it was just to get this, let alone add that level and that level and that level, right? It's like, and I appreciate the feedback in that people are excited and they're seeing the potential for it, but I'm
Yeah.
down here and they're like asking for up here already, and it's like that's a
Yeah.
little bit of a confidence hit, right? And so it's hard to just
Yeah.
it can be hard to kind of take that in and be like, all right, I understand where that's coming from. It's not necessarily a critique
Yeah.
on what I'm doing. It's just excited aspiration for where it could go. And sure,
Yeah.
I'd love to get
Yeah.
there, but damn, this is hard. I need time.
Yeah, I mean, I love the stuff that you've been doing with the different lenses, you and Emily, and it's got incredible potential. But I think that's not what you want to hear, right? Because some of the shots you're showing is because you really like them.
Yeah.
But people are going, "Yo, wait till you get." What do you mean?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's-
Uh-huh.
yeah, can't you see
Exactly.
it? Yeah, man, it's yeah. I think it's just an interesting when you're learning new things.
It's a reset.
Yeah, I
It,
like
it
that.
takes you back
Yeah.
down to a learning kind of beginner level. And when I haven't been there for a while myself, it takes me a while emotionally to kind of accept and be willing to listen to some of those things, because a lot of that feedback is helpful in a way if I can be open to it and not shut down, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean yeah. It's just I think I've been learning just where I get my affirmation from.
Yeah.
I think that's been such a key thing, is just where am I getting that from and what really counts. Because that really helps then to learn.
Yeah.
I was laughing with you about feedback I got recently, and it's just it's learning not to take offense is just so important.
Correct.
If you want to grow, and,
Yeah.
and I think that's it for me. Is like, yeah, you can have confidence enough to go out, it's at a certain level, but yeah, it's just, I think I'm learning like you're learning, just not to get offended by
Yep.
stuff, and just to keep doing the stuff that I love and reminding myself, why I'm doing that. Because yeah, there's a subjectivity to art, which I think we also need to remind ourselves about.
Yep.
There's a good 30% that's subjective. And I always look to history and the different art movements, and not all were celebrated, but they now are. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. But
Yeah.
I think it's that baseline confidence, Ray. And I think it's brave, I know the kind of lenses you guys are using. And that's, yeah, I mean, I think the images you're getting are incredible because of just the difficulty, and that's the excitement. Yeah, but that's brave, right? I don't think too many people are going to pick up those lenses and try. So well done.
Yeah, well, and to segue back to the photo we're staring at right here, it sounds like you had a little bit of that as well, right? You had to get to that level of confidence to be able to share this image, and I personally, and I'm sure so many others are grateful that you did, that we get to see an image like this, because I think if you, like you said, if you take some of that feedback or the fear of feedback so personally and to heart so much, it can really stifle us and not let us experiment and try these other things, right? It can just shut that down so quickly, and that's a shame for a lot of people.
Yeah, that experimentation leads to some of those shots that people aren't going to take because they're not persevering.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot like, I mean, I know your heart and my heart are aligned there is to help people just have that foundation, because I want to see those images.
Totally. Yeah. So I have a bunch of points that I made on this photo, and I'm just going to kind of maybe, I don't know, I think it might be fun to just run down like a handful of them and then kind of have a discussion about them. But I got to say, like,
Awesome.
the first thing I love about this photo is, and you kind of talked about it, you touched on it, which I liked earlier when you were describing this photo, is I think there's two types of small in frame bird and habitat shots, and the one to me is, here's the habitat that happens to have a bird in it, like that's the story, and then the other is, here's a bird photo and the habitat that bird lives in, and that's the different story. And I always tend to strive for the latter there. I want the bird to be the main subject, and boy, does it, like, do you nail that with this one. Like, to me, when I first see this photo, it's all about the bird. Like, that is immediately where my eye goes. There's no question. There's no struggle for my eye to get pulled anywhere else. It's right to that bird. And the way it's perched, I love that it's singing. I love that it's singing just because that feels relaxed. It adds a sense of like comfort for the bird to me, just because I've seen them out there, and when they're singing, they're usually there's not a predator around, or they're not worried about the photographer and interfering with that, right, when they're singing. I guess they're not always relaxed because sometimes they're territorially singing and stuff like that. But as far as like interaction with the photographer, there's a level of comfort that comes with that singing pose. So I really enjoy that. And then I think for me, the biggest, like the one word I could describe this photo the most is just lines. Like, I love all the lines in this photo. You have so many lines that are all working so well together, bringing me in different directions nicely. We have all of the obvious lines of these mountainsides, the hillsides with the low dramatic lighting, which makes a big difference there, right? Casting all those shadows on them, creating those very distinct lines that are all sort of sloping down and leading in towards this side. We have the obvious lines, the bold line of the rock in the foreground. And then the lines on the bird itself with the coloration of that, the circled in lines of each one of these lakes and ponds back here. I love that there's an odd number of them. I love the shape that pulls me back in. It's really cool to me that these ponds sort of like draw me back into this scene deeper and deeper. And then I had another note of like just the coloration, Rich. Like the coloration of the bird is almost an exact palette match for the rest of the photo. I don't know how much of that was intentional on your part or just happenstance, like this was the species that you photographed there. But I mean, you know, the black, white, and orange tone, and then we have like the dark orange and the white tones in this photo are just incredible. And just the overall atmosphere of it too, man. The sense that there's a little bit of a haze that sort of like fades into the back there, which I think to me works really well regarding that it de-emphasizes the back there and sort of gives a sense of depth to the photo. And then something I didn't have written down but just kind of struck me now as I'm talking about it more is that sense of height. I love that it feels like we're up there with the bird getting to look out over this landscape. Like that's another definite piece. So I still have more things to talk about, but maybe we'll stop there and break some of those down a little bit more.
Yeah, that's awesome, Ray. Thank you. And I think it's just really, I mean, it's obviously something I know you look for and I look for, but when you can match your subject to colors in the background, it's a very powerful connection point, you know, and creates a togetherness and what art would define as harmony. So I think like, I definitely am conscious of that. Like, I mean, this was just the background, but you know, birds are made so that they also blend in and suit the environment. So it's not complete chance that it happens. But definitely part of it. And I think the line for me that just, I guess from studying art and the one that makes the biggest difference to me is those dam system.
Yeah.
Because, you know, art is kind of what they would call a linear perspective, like a vanishing point.
Yes.
You know, if you look at like how, you know, and I never thought I remember when I started photography and like guys were talking about stuff like this, I'm like, how is this ever like, you know, going to help me? But having studied how artists create depth, you know, vanishing point linear perspective is one of the most powerful ways to do that. And so when I saw this in this scene, I was like, that is awesome because it is all about depth, you know?
Yeah.
And I love that you bring the atmosphere as well, because that's another technique artists use to create depth. But I think that linear perspective that just goes all the way out of the scene, for me was so important because, this particular image was taken in Borna Nature Reserve. And it is that, you know, you sit you climb up the Voortrekker path right to the top, eventually found these birds, and I knew this is a scene I wanted to show off. And it is all about height and depth and that it just goes on and on. So awesome.
Do you know off the top of your head, I think I have the info that I can look up, but do you know roughly what focal length you shot this at?
Yeah, I do, because it's, I think what people often don't understand about my conic birdscapes, they're different to my other habitat shots or my wide angle habitat shots. So I find I shoot them between normally 100 and 150 mils. So I'm hiding in between a rock cluster about, I would say not more than 4 meters from that bird.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into like this particular image, and why it was so difficult is you need to know the comfort distance of these birds.
Sure.
And also, like, I wouldn't really try this outside of winter, because what I found in winter, because I've been watching them for years, is they tend to have like 3 males and 1 female. I don't know what I just notice it a lot. They're 3 males, 1 female, and then I know like they are super curious and inquisitive. I think it's because I don't know, like I always just think because there's a team of them, you know.
Yes.
So they're just just huge personalities and really curious and like just often bombing around and calling and doing their thing.
Yeah.
And it tends to be in winter and that kind of dynamic, which allows you to kind of hide and get into position to get these shots when they just are more, I guess, just comfortable and confiding. Because I haven't been able to do this in summer. So there's a lot of kind of, I guess, field craft and learning about the subject that allows you to kind of, because that focal length, I mean, you know, Ray, like they can hear you breathe.
Oh yeah. Exactly. Right at 100 millimeter on that one.
Yeah. So that's why it took, so long, because you'd kind of, not be able to get close enough, not get the scene, not get the light. And as you can see, like you needed this sort of the sun is just rising,
Yeah.
you see that little detail on the rock with the light just shining on the rock and how the birds lit up. You needed that kind of side light to give the lines that you talked about.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think if you're further away, you're going to get the classic, your former description, the bird in the habitat,
Yes.
where it's all about the habitat and very little about the bird.
Yep.
And I think like you, just because I've loved birds, I used to shoot at like 600 mils with a low f-stop to create that separation, but then wouldn't get the full landscape.
Correct.
And it was really with mirrorless technology that like these images are repeatable, because
Yeah.
to try and do those DSLRs at 100 mils, yeah, just more frustrating than fun.
Yeah. Yeah. You closed down your aperture a little bit as well. It looked like, I think f8, it looks like. Yeah. So that was an obvious choice, right? Did you experiment with that much leading up to this image and try different apertures for depth of field?
Yeah, I mean, I normally shoot these kind of images f10 to f13.
Yeah.
Yeah, so actually a little bit, lower than I would have liked.
Okay.
I can't really remember why I did that, but I guess I was just looking through the mirrorless camera and seeing that I was getting in the depth that I required and the details I required. So probably didn't think to increase it. But I think you could have gone, because I think I had the shutter speed to probably go even higher on my f-stop.
Plenty of shutter speed. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
To be honest, probably a mistake on my side. Probably could have pushed it up to f10, f12. But I think, the thing with mirrorless is when you see it, you're just gonna get excited about what's there.
Well, and interestingly, I mean, at least on mine, the aperture and depth of field is the one thing you don't get to see live in the viewfinder. Like, you still don't see that until you take the photo, because that's when it closes
it does
that
its
aperture
smallest
down, right?
aperture. You're right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, we still have to kind of have some understanding and experiment with that, I think, to get that. And I got to say,
you did right.
I feel like the aperture you chose here worked so well. Like, there's a little bit of softness and blur to the background that to me helps add that depth, but not to the point of where like all of these trees are merging in together because they're so out of focus or anything like that, right? We're still seeing the detail, but it's softer back there. I think it works well, man. I really do.
Yeah, I'm not even sure like F10 would have changed it, like if I think about it, because that's far away.
Yeah.
The background.
You're right.
And it's like when you're shooting with a prime lens, you might be in trouble. But when you're shooting with a 100 to 500 millimeter zoom lens at an f8. But yeah, I mean, I think I could have easily pushed it to f10, but I'm not sure it would have like necessarily changed a ton here.
Probably not. Yeah. And how important was it? I'm leading this question because I think I know the answer, but I just want the audience to hear it. But how important was it to place yourself exactly where you did, with that pointy rock coming up into the middle of that first pond area?
Yeah, I mean, I pre-chose this place to wait. So it was literally waiting for the birds to land on this rock. So this is one of the most intentional, like similar to yours, but I knew the birds were there and I knew what rock and I knew where you had to climb. Yeah. Because otherwise you'd miss the framing, and anywhere else in that rock just wouldn't have the framing, wouldn't have worked quite as powerfully. It was, I think that was just the difficulty why it took so long. Yeah. Is that you needed to use that dam to frame, because I think otherwise you wouldn't have had the focus point that you needed. Correct. And you needed it at the top, to be at the highest point there. So definitely, and a lot that had to come together.
I think it's so great that, and this is another thing that I love talking about, Rich, is photos like this. Like, people maybe see these photos and like, oh wow, that was really good, but there's so much field craft that's so much more important than the actual gear. Like, the gear almost doesn't matter. You could have taken this with almost any camera from within the last 10 years, almost any lens from within the last 10 years or even 15. But what mattered so much is the field craft and your understanding of this habitat, your understanding of these birds, how they behave, like you said, the three males and the female, and how they're moving around, how I'm sure, just like most birds of this type, when they do decide to territorially sing, they will sing on the highest point of something, like they will find that little high point and sing out on it. Like that's what they do. And so learning and understanding all of that, those
where
are
they're
the
going to go,
ingredients.
where they're going to perch. Because if you
Yeah.
chosen a different rock, you wouldn't have gone up on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's assessing all those things, right? Which is part of what I love, and I think like
Yeah.
partly comes if you spend I always tell people to fall in love with their subjects, because when you do, then yeah, you kind of learn about them
Yeah.
because you're just curious and interested and excited to know them better. But that all comes into like the field craft you talk about, and yeah, I think that. I mean, there's one thing I'd say, I wouldn't really try these shots without mirrorless and the ability to get animal eye, just because of the tricky nature of locking focus. But I think outside of that, like, yeah, you're right. I think you could do it with, just any decent DSLR and, like in terms of image quality and in
Yeah.
terms of just, getting this type of image. But yeah, I think for me, just the animal eye autofocus just allows you, because this happens in a few seconds.
Sure.
You want it there, but you want it dead sharp,
Yeah.
on that bird, to be able to get the bird coming in, lock on its eye, and then compose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just find has made these shots possible for me where, yeah, just far more painful and frustrating when I was shooting with DSLR, and especially if they're flying, into
Sure.
scene. It's just, yeah, it's been a bit of a game changer, for particularly this type of imagery, for it to be consistent. Now that I just learned a lot about how to do this, it's repeatable. Like I've started to put together a body of work. But yeah, I think that was the game changer for me. And also to see a bit more of exposure and how your image is
Totally.
going to look.
Yeah.
Just really technology has been an enabler to make this more possible. But yeah, I think the field craft, and that's it. I think without the field craft, I always say, like, go and try and get these images. Everyone to, because they take a certain passion and love for your
Yeah.
subject, and I hope everyone gets to experience that, because they just don't happen that often. And I find it's a coming together of, even if it's it happens quickly, but it's normally in a place that I've spent a lot of time in. I know where the light's going to fall. I know
Yeah.
where the birds are likely to be active. All that piles up in your memory bank, and just means you use the time really well when you're there. But yeah.
And I do love that, going back to this sort of gear versus fieldcraft concept. I kind of love that images like this actually don't require the top end, the top of the line, highest end gear, right? That's out of financial reach for a lot of people. I remember myself when I was in the beginning of this, all I wanted was that super high end, really expensive, big fast prime lens, because that's when I'll be able to make great photos. But the reality is, like, where I've gone and the direction you've gone with a lot of your photography is, the gear becomes so much more irrelevant. And so it doesn't require that super fast. We're not shooting these birds blasting in flight against a busy background, and we need the fast glass and the highest end autofocus. None of that matters for this style of shot. So for anybody out there listening and watching that is maybe, plateaued by their ability to buy some new stuff, it's like, you can go do these right now. All you need is the time and the experience and the field craft. Like, learn that. And that costs nothing but just being out in nature, which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I think a mirrorless camera and just a zoom lens, and you can do it, because it doesn't require you to see every feather on the bird. Although, I mean, it's lovely when you've got yeah, I think that's where, trying to say, like, if we storytellers, what I love is technology has been such created a level playing field. So now, if you're shooting a bottom of the range, mirrorless camera, just because of the focusing system, I think is helpful for these shots. But, with that, just a decent lens, a zoom lens, but not a very expensive one. And with artificial intelligence, you can create images that you can put on your wall and other people's walls. And I think people get so, caught up in like the noise and what ISO I can use, and I don't have the ISO performance. And I'm like, well, that only really counts if you're going to enter competitions, to be honest, because then they're looking for in camera. But it doesn't stop you being a storyteller and people buying your art and you being recognized for your storytelling, your understanding of composition.
Yeah.
And so I've loved how technology has really like just helped level the playing field. And exactly what you say, made it so much more accessible. I think it's also made it much harder to stand out, Ray. And I think
Yeah.
so, part of the things we talk about fieldcraft is part of setting the table for creative success, right?
Yeah.
Is that putting in the practice. Yeah. And then I think that's why I enjoy teaching creativity, because I think that's the only thing that's going to be left soon,
Yeah,
is
I
your
agree.
ability to set your own table for creative success in the way that you uniquely were made to do that. Yeah, and I love that, because then it's like, yeah, it gets people to focus on, I think, the most exciting stuff, which is creating something that they love.
I've been working in this industry to be kind of privileged enough to go through two major transitions. When I first started as a working photographer, I was working for a wedding photography studio that shot all film. And this was in 1999, right? The first digital cameras were just starting to come out. So I was in a working studio through that film to digital transition. And the thing that you would keep hearing and reading and seeing in magazine articles, not internet articles at the time, right? Was, you know, this digital technology is just making it too easy for everybody. It's taking the creativity out of photography and blah, blah, blah. Well, turns out the reality is it just enabled everybody to be a little bit more thoughtful and creative because the technology made photography easier. Like, that was the reality, right? But to me, that complaint was just the sort of, I don't want to grow anymore. I don't want to learn anymore. Old school curmudgeon guy that just didn't want to push themselves and learn the next thing. And so they were just sort of blaming the gear that their photography wasn't standing out anymore. And then we had the mirrorless transition, and it was the same thing again, Rich. I heard all the same things of like so many photographers out there just saying the technology is so good and anybody can be a great photographer now. And it's like, what's wrong with that? Isn't that a good thing? Like, I think if you just change your perspective on that, and like you said, this allows you to be so much more creative in these other areas because it frees up your mind. You don't have to worry about the focus and the exposure and all these other technical details as much anymore. And so I'm sure there'll be another one down the road again, because it just, history repeats itself in that regard. But it's been so interesting to go through those transitions and see the similar kind of overall complaint be levied against the new technology, when the reality is that really wasn't the problem. It's kind of you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I just love that it allows people of all skills, different
Me too.
budgets, to be able to create the stories they want to tell and express themselves. And I think that's what, probably why these videos and this, the stuff we talked about in the podcast we did together a while back is becoming more interesting and popular. I
Yeah.
think we're going to see a massive turn from like technical videos to actually helping people be artists.
Yeah.
And so a lot more talk about how do you express yourself? How do you tell stories? How do you create? How do you set the table for creativity, as opposed to telling them how to use their cameras in different ways? And that for me is really exciting. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't see photography as like a competition.
Yeah.
And because art's been around for ages, man. And like, there's still artists that differentiate themselves. It's creating something that expresses who you are, that other people want to buy or love or learn from.
Yep.
And so why should photography be any different? Like,
That's a great point.
it's just so, yeah, I like, but as if it's a competition, and you spent your life like learning how to take flight shots, and mastered flight shots because that's how you're going to differentiate yourself. Yeah, I can understand why it's a real bummer,
Yeah.
because it's like now everyone, it's much easier to get really
Sure.
good at flight shots. But even then, I think it's just silly to kind of, because your training and what that training with DSLR flight shots did is just make you take advantage of mirrorless
Totally.
far more often and better than those that haven't practiced. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I love how technology is leading the way. I mean, even in artificial intelligence, which is another conversation. But
Sure.
yeah, I just embrace it for the good. I can see how it's misleading and creates a lack of, people worry about authenticity. But there's ways around that too.
Sure.
I think, to be honest, I think it's great because I think people want more
Yeah.
authenticity. And so, like, it's like, for those that are authentic. I think people are craving that. So yeah, I think it's just like how, I don't know. I mean, you've known me for a while. I think I'm
Yeah.
just an optimist,
Yes.
and kind of excited about life and go like, well, this is awesome. Like, how do we use it to do more of what we love? And that's probably such a good point, Ray, is like, it is helping people to do what they love, take images that they love, spend time with birds that they love and
Yeah.
places that they love. Because you're gonna like, it's just such a mindset of great artists. They just love stuff. They
Yeah.
did it because they love stuff. And as soon as you stop the main thing being the main thing, you lose just that specialness, that uniqueness. That's who you are. So yeah, like, and I just don't think technology should influence that. It's just how to use it to do that even better.
Wonderfully said. Yeah, no, I very much agree. All right, I have one other thing that I wanted to point out in this photo that I wanted to talk about, and I have two questions for you about options with this photo. So
Yeah,
the first thing I wanted to point out is with really small in frame, bird and landscape shots like this, one of the things I've learned with my own experimentation is I don't particularly love when the perch that the bird is on is just sort of jutting into the scene. And I think about that more with like a branch or something like that, because it sort of feels like it disconnects me from the scene, like if I just have this branch coming
there's
in.
no context.
There's no like connection to it, and I feel like these photos work the best when it is just like a like approaching it like a landscape photo and having that foreground and that midground and then background and something visually that kind of connects them. And while this one does sort of have that 2-layer effect, like we have the rock here and the bird on that one layer and then our background, it's something about the way the rock comes in, the angle of it. I know that rock, it's not a branch, so I know that rock is connected to the ground right underneath of it. And then I can almost visually see, I feel like with the angle that rock comes in here, it sort of just somehow still connects me right into the rest of the scene and pulls me back in there. And so I wanted to point out how I think this one works so well because of what it is. But if I were to imagine this bird sitting on just a single branch coming into here, like off to the side or something like that, it would be really weird. It would just be like almost like I cut them out and put in this background. Like there's no visual connection there.
I love that, eh? Yeah, really cool observation. I didn't really, it's so lovely to have other people see stuff, because it actually then goes, but I like that, and I can intentionally see it. Because funny, like I find those ones where it's just like something jutting out. It doesn't connect you to the scene and can look artificial or weird.
Yep.
And it's an interesting thought, because I've been studying sort of harmony in art, which the question you ask yourself is it's a togetherness. Like, how do you create togetherness in your image? And one of the questions you ask when analyzing, is there anything awkward? And so like, that's the kind of stuff like, right, that just messes with the togetherness of the scene. It's a bit like a bent horizon. Like I try to explain it to people. It just, even if it was bent, it just makes people go, that's awkward. It should be straight, Yep. And I remember one of my mentorship participants was like, hey, here's a photo. And the photo won like Wildlife Photographer of the Year, and it had a skew horizon. And I don't really know the purpose of sending it to me, but I thought it was such a great example, because it was just the best. It was a brilliant image, just brilliant. But all I replied, I said, yes, imagine how much better it would have been if they straight at the horizon. Because a lot of people complained, to go, how could Wildlife Photographer of the Year award this image? And I'm like, because it's such a great image.
Yeah.
But it's like, if they just made one change, it would have been even greater, because the rest of the people would have gone, that's even more awesome. And it was such an easy thing to do.
Sure.
And I think it's like I've become like so excited about like just the small enhancements and the small things you can do to change the image that, I don't know, for me, like maybe don't count, but I think they do, just small adjustments can help people just embrace your image, because that's what you want. You're presenting it to an audience of different cultures all around the world. And so if you can do things that just make it feel more together, all the better. Yeah. And I love that you point that out. I didn't really think about it at the time, but I think it does make it.
I think it's exactly what you said with that. I love the word of togetherness there, and how it just all feels cohesive and comfortable and not awkward, because that is so much of, to me, what those little enhancements do. They're not in your face. Nobody's probably going to maybe even consciously be aware of them as the viewer, because they didn't know you made those changes, but they all add up to an overall more comfortable, just cohesive, natural feeling image. And to me, it's like, especially if there's, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them that you make in camera and in post, all these little tiny things, they just add up and then they add up. And then next thing you know, that image goes from, this was a solid image, to, wow, that's a great image, because of all those little decisions. So I love that you brought that up as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of those that kind of linked, and you would have seen, because I'm sure you'll show the raw image
Yeah.
to people watching, but there was such a conscious choice in sort of color variation between the foreground and the background, and it's interesting. It's the one place that I've always been uncomfortable to go that far, because most of my shots were not landscape shots when I started. So I'm probably the laziest post-process in the world, Ray. In fact, you'd be embarrassed about how little I know about post-processing. So I try not to let the cat out the bag. But
Yeah.
but when it came to these kind of scenes, I always felt really awkward in the beginning, like changing the foreground and the background. But it was just encouraged by a friend of mine, because you can't change your like white balance or exposure or the temperature, for different parts of the image. But that was the one really intentional thing. And it's a small thing, but for me, a big thing is this is winter. It's really cold. You can see the mist coming in to cover the dams. Yet the raw image is a very warm, it's all warm. And for me, like that betrayed, like, you can see it there. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, wow.
I made quite a big change in terms of moving it from all warm. That background I've cooled down, but I've kept the bird warm, almost the foreground. And so that was so intentional from a storytelling perspective. And one of the details is really small. What I've learned from art is that a cool background seems further away than a warm background. And I think you can pick it up between the two differences between these images.
Sure.
And so, it was part of like changing. Well, that's actually that's the scene. It's cold. The mist is coming in. So I wanted it cool, but I wanted to show that it's warming up, that, the sun has risen, that it's starting to light up the scene and the bird. So it was, it's actually it's a second image that I had to do way more than I would ever have done from a post-processing perspective. And I think part of that encouragement was judging competitions and seeing just the leeway that landscape photographers get with their images as opposed to bird or wildlife photographers. Is you can't get what you want in camera. So there are certain changes and adjustments you make to actually authentically represent the scene the way you would have represented it if you could. And so, these are the images that still leave me a little bit more uncomfortable, but I guess that's what I love about just showing the raw, so people can see what you've done. And so for me, it's still such an authentic representation of the scene and what I felt and just what the mood was. But very conscious. And that's maybe a not so small, but just the move from warm to cool. I love how this image plays on that. And I think it makes it, because to be honest, the raw just doesn't give the depth.
Sure.
It doesn't give the mood, doesn't tell about the winter environment. And it was an important change, I think.
And I also love how the coolness you brought into that foreground rock perch as well sort of contrasts with the bird. I feel like here the rock is maybe in the raw, it's maybe like less prominent and doesn't quite contrast with the bird quite in the same way, or contrast with the rest of the scene, like the warmer tones on the hills here. But then this got the cooler white balance. The bird stayed warm, so a little bit more contrast. So like the rock is a little bit more prominent and noticeable here, but that cooler tone also does that as well, and then gives a nice visual color contrast to jump back into the rest of the scene and the bird and all of that as well. It works so much better in my opinion.
Yeah, and it just was I thought a good example to mention about when you can see things that you can learn from other artists or other genres, and then see how to use them in your final product. Or a big part of this was obviously setting the scene and getting the picture as it was. But I find with these kind of images, there's also intentionality in your post-processing, and it's these small changes. Like I never knew. I don't know if you did, but it was quite a recent discovery to think that color actually changes the depth. And so that's such a cool, it's a very small thing, but can see how I've used it, and it's I guess why I like just I'm like a broken record when it comes to other photographers. Is just yeah, get curious about art, man. It's just amazing how it just like the incremental things I'm learning even now, like at the academy that I'm part of. It's just interesting, like
Yeah.
where and a lot of it you end up using, and some of it's really subtle. Um, and so yeah, it just helps you kind of put together scenes better going forward.
All right. So my questions. Here we go. So
Yeah,
I'm
hit me.
I'm assuming that we have some hills back here, some mountains, but they're probably not that tall. It probably would have been possible to maybe include some of the horizon, like the sky up there. A, was that even the case? Was it possible, or were the like hills and mountains too high? And B, was that anything you even thought of? Because I have to say, from my perspective, I don't think that would have done as well, because we would have had another bright element at the top, just kind of like pulling me off the edge of the frame. So I love that it
Yeah.
ends with like the other light area being another one of these damn ponds.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you. I think that would have been a mistake because I think the biggest thing for me is that linear perspective,
Yeah.
which also brings everything together. It creates this beautiful sort of S shape,
Yes.
arabesque, which creates a sense of togetherness as well. And so I think you want to emphasize the things that tell your story, and I think putting cloud and stuff there would have just distracted from that. But
Yep.
to be honest, if you look at the raw, I would have probably done what you don't like, is made there's hardly any crop here, right? It's
Yep.
full frame, pretty much. I think there's tiny bit off the right-hand side, but very little, right? So yeah, and I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't go back because I had rocks all around me
Yeah.
and behind. So this was very intentionally. I would have moved further back, but then the bird would have got smaller. Yeah, so I guess I could have, but like it just, yeah, it didn't make sense at the time. But also
Yeah.
where I was, yeah, I couldn't have lifted it up because then I would have made the perch less significant.
Yep. Yep.
Um, yeah, but I don't think I thought of including it. Yeah, and I think you're right. I don't think it would have helped.
Yeah, no, I just wanted it's interesting. I just wanted to point out because there's also like this visual, like the pattern. I guess we didn't talk about this either, like sort of the hierarchy for me, and I think it's just a great time to just quickly mention it. Like for me, it's this bird, and the perch, and then this shape right here, this circle that just encompasses and frames, the bird so nicely. And then I gotta say, for me, a lot of it is like these dams like pull me back, the next bright one and the next one. And then there's this lovely circle that brings me right back into these lines that pull me right back to the bird. So there's such this circular
Mm.
visual pattern that just happens there that just keeps me within the frame, keeps me coming back to the subject. Even if I let my eyes drift all the way into the back, I get pulled right back in here, and having sky or clouds at the top would have completely interrupted that.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I'm just trying to be authentic. I can't think if I intentionally thought of that. I clearly like, either didn't or I just don't know if I did it purposely. But yeah, I think I would have just taken away
Yeah.
from exactly what you're saying. And, it's interesting you mentioned. I think one of the things that I try and help people with to hone the intuition in this regard is just how important repetition and patterns are.
Yeah.
Because they create like, when you study repetition, repeated things create movement or a flow. And I think there's a principle of movement in art, and people think that's all about action and your subject moving. But no, it's a sense of movement. And I think people underestimate what lines and patterns do is they create a sense of movement. And,
Mm.
and that's the visual flow through your image. And so, yeah, exactly what you're picking up is there's lines that all are
Yeah.
in the same direction that get you to move towards the bird. And yeah, I think that's so important to start noticing, in nature and in your images, because I think I didn't, when I started, didn't think I had any intuition. But one thing I noticed is, and it's something I've really honed, is I'm constantly looking for patterns and repeated elements. And there's different types, right? You can have repetition, but
Sure.
also patterns where it's just elements that create a pattern. It's not a perfect pattern, but
Yeah.
it creates something that, yeah, it just creates a beauty in the image, or framing, or
Which
or
is what I would
something
say
that's
these
just
hills are.
interesting. Yeah.
Like they're not an exact pattern, but there's a constant, like there's a line, there's another
Yeah.
line. They're all generally pointing us back into the ponds, or they're directly at the bird, and while they're not like a mathematical perfect pattern, they are in this image.
Yeah, and they create like, one is movement towards your subject, but also when you break them with your subject, they create an immediate focal point. So I
Yeah.
really try and get people to start honing and start looking intentionally for patterns. Because when you see patterns in an environment, that's a really good start. And if you can make order from them, and there's
Yeah.
not because that's the thing with the Whitterbirds I'm shooting at the moment, is to get the grass to make a repeated pattern and not have
Oh,
one grass, diagonal line that
yeah.
completely stuffs it up.
Yep.
But you've got to be so alert to that all the time so that you recognize it quickly and can take advantage of it. So yeah, it's a cool thing to just start being more intentional about.
It's my favorite thing to teach when I'm out with a client and out in the field, and I point out something. They're like, "Oh, I never even noticed that," and now they are aware of it, and like making,
Yeah.
compositional placement decisions of where they are and trying to incorporate that stuff. And I'm like, "Oh yes, I love seeing that light bulb click for people."
Yeah,
So
it's huge.
it
really
is, yeah. All right. So my last question, and I wonder if this is something you ever do with your photos. Did you try to horizontally flip this photo in post to see what it looks like? And is that something you ever do with your photos? Because I gotta say, I almost never do it for whatever reason. I almost never do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we chatted about this before, and I always flip my images, always. Like because it's funny, like what I've noticed. My son loves beetles, and so I've been doing quite a lot of macro photography, not trying to be professional at it, just so he can identify and see that the beetles are different.
Yeah.
But it's funny when I flip images that the beetles coming in from what's it, my right, versus when I flip it on my left. I judge like straightness
Yeah.
much better when the beetle's on the
Oh
left than
wow.
I do. Yeah, it's been a weird thing, Ray. So like I almost just do it one to just check that, and
Yeah.
it visually has a different feeling.
Yeah.
And
No
so
doubt.
I just do it out of just interested to see whether the feeling will be different and how different, and does that influence, say, the crop in this image, or
Yeah.
change how I feel about it. And yeah, I think I know like yours is often from an authenticity, like that's how I saw it, so that's how I want to present it. But yeah, I'm probably more relaxed. I want to see what tells the story best. So I will flip it to see whether it communicates my
Hmm.
story better flipped. In the case of this one, no, because I
Okay.
wanted people's eyes to come in from the left. It's all about this movement down to the bird, and I
Yeah.
wanted people's eyes to settle on the bird because it's all about the bird. And yes, I have flipped it, and actually I shared it flipped on Instagram
Oh,
recently
funny.
because it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because I wanted to line it up with some other stuff, so it just worked for me to flip it.
Yeah. Let's
So,
see. I think I can do it real quick here.
yeah. Yeah, so I think it still works. It works both ways. I
Yeah.
do much prefer it. I say not much. I still think it works really well this way. I just like it for the reasons I mentioned.
Yeah.
It's just I like that your eyes come in, and I just think it's what art would say is a better telling of the story. But yeah, I will often just flip, and so if the difference is subtle, I'll just keep it authentic. But if I really like the other one, and I think so for example, if the bird's moving, and so art will tell you left to right, leave space in front. That's just a guideline. It's a
Sure.
powerful guideline because it's also what people have a bias towards it. So if I've got a moving bird and the story is about movement, and
Mm.
it happened to be moving, right to left, I'll flip it for sure. Because I mean, I'm happy to show you the raw. I don't think anyone's going to be
Yeah.
super upset, but like I'll flip it because it tells the story and it will draw you in more. Not
Gotcha.
me saying that, just art saying that. So I do use the guidelines of art when
Mhm.
it comes to flipping. And if it really is an important part of the story, I'll use the one that art says will tell that story more powerfully. But a lot of the times I'll also visually think it tells it more powerfully, and
Okay.
I'll choose the one that I think does it best. So yeah,
Yeah.
I normally just advise if it's moving and it's flying and it's telling it more powerfully, well, then flip it. But if it's one of these kind of images where you could tell the story both ways, I'm kind of, yeah, just let the artist decide. But yeah, I think it's just there's personal subject stuff in all of this. Same.
Yeah, so I got to say, Rich, I don't have a problem at all, especially even with like the authenticity of it, of flipping an image. Like that doesn't bother me. What happens to me every time, and I wonder how you have maybe worked around this, is I shot an image a certain way. I've culled through a whole series of images all faced a certain way, and then as soon as I flip it, it just like breaks my brain. It feels wrong. It feels like I've thrown something off because I think just because I've looked at it a one way
interesting.
like so long.
Yeah.
And it's not that I have like I want to keep it the way I shot it. That really doesn't play a role in it.
Oh really?
It's just more of a, oh, this is jarring. I don't know what to to do with it the few times, and I think I'm so used to seeing it the one way. So I wonder.
Yeah.
My question is, like, have you done anything to kind of work through that, or you're really trying to just maybe break down the image more aesthetically instead of just what you're used to? Because it's a jarring feeling every time for me.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I just do it all the time, and I guess I'm going like, one, subjectively, which one do I like visually?
Yeah.
Because I'm not, I've gone through a whole series and picked the one that I like the most, but I'm not, I'm still working out, this is a story, but how best, because the post-processing is a separate part. I've got done the best I can in the field. Now I'm going, how well can I tell the story in post-processing, which for me is normally, other than when it comes to exposure or white balance, like in these scenes, I'm not doing much at all.
Sure.
And so I'm just using post-processing to, I guess, perfect or add lipstick to the model. And then I'm also just using rotation and, because I might just rotate it slightly to see if I can get lines matching up or get rid of something I don't want. And then I'm flipping to just actually, I want to actually see which one I like before I decide.
Okay.
So it's probably just like a procedural thing. I'm so used to not making a decision until I see both. And then I do try to objectively, if it's a really important image to me, I will pretty much like what we did in our last episode. I'll try and objectively go, what would art tell me I should do with this image? Because I don't really buy that, like, learn the rules that you can break them. I just don't understand that. I learn the guidelines so I can use them. And if I'm going to not use a guideline, it's on purpose. Yeah. It's either because it makes no difference to the story, or it's on purpose because it doesn't suit the story I'm trying to tell.
Or there's another reason that trumps it, Yeah,
well, there's certain guidelines that are often they're both there. Yeah. And so who gets to decide which one's more important, because they're both guidelines? Unfortunately, camera clubs don't. You can't make rules of these things. The artist gets to decide which tells their story better. And there's like classic examples. It's like, guideline of thirds, intersection point on the third or vertical or horizontal line, and a leading line. Yeah. Like I've seen people crop out like a really strong leading line to put their bird on the intersection points. And I'm like, but those are both guidelines. Yeah. And you use the guidelines to tell your story. And that leading line is so much more powerful than moving your bird, like a tiny bit off the intersection point. And I'm like, no one's even going to notice that it's not on the intersection
without
point.
The grid there. Yeah.
But it's like compositions become a rule, like A, B, C, D equals great photograph. And it's just not that, The more you study it, they're guidelines and they're there for your use to tell your story. And so, like I use the objectivity, but I'm consciously thinking, how do what I know about art best tell this particular story? And then I'll make those choices. And some of those are subjective, which I think is more powerful, left to right. Which guideline is going to be more impactful to my viewer. Yeah, there's a degree of subjectivity in there, but I think because I'm not constrained by rules, you end up normally making some good choices, as opposed to what rules do, which I think often lead to lack, you lose confidence because they don't always work. And then, I don't understand why you would break them unless it's for like tension, because they're there to help you create a pleasing image. So I'm going, if you're going to break them, then you're creating tension or imbalance or whatever. Like, as long as you're doing that intentionally, then I think awesome. Yeah. But you also need to realize that probably not everyone, unless it's so obvious, is going to pick that up, and you might have more people not like your image. Yeah. So I think, that's a lot of like just how I try to be objective, but then also just lean on like what I love,
Okay.
It's probably the final choice. Yeah.
Well, as
Yeah,
always,
definitely.
man, I just love having a conversation with you about this stuff. And we did it again. We talked almost an hour on one image. So,
Oh man, Ray, like I know we kind of said we got to shorten these, but yeah, I love chatting to you, man. And I hope it's just encouraging for other, artists and
it is for
photographers
me.
and
So, who cares?
yeah, I kind of go with
No,
that. I
I
love
hope
our
it is
time
too.
together, man. So, but yeah, I think we should choose some very like maybe some portraits or like some
Yes,
different images for our next ones. And yeah, because I think that will give a very different flavor. I have
for
such a
sure.
different approach, funny enough, to portraiture versus birds in the environment.
Yeah.
So maybe we can do something like that just to kind of give the audience something else to think about or consider. But
I think
yeah,
that's a
thanks
great
again,
idea.
man. Been such an awesome time. And yeah, love the time with you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Tune in again. We will be doing more of these.
Awesome. Cheers, everyone.